I'm Maya Chupkov, and I'm a woman who stutters.
And I'm Cynthia Chin, Maya's longtime friend, and I know nothing about stuttering.
And this is Proud Stutter, a podcast about stuttering and embracing verbal diversity in an effort to change how we talk about it, one conversation at a time. So by now, most of our listeners know I have a covert stutter, and that is why I am so excited to have my friend Sarah on the podcast, because she too has a covert stutter, and it's been a topic I've really been wanting to really dig deep on because it's something I constantly am thinking about. The hardest part about having a covert stutter is it's unpredictable, and that's one of the key things that Sarah and I talk about. So I'm really excited to have Sarah on the show. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
So I know that you and Maya are friends, but how did you meet?
Maya and I met not too long ago. Actually, I got an email from the National Stuttering Association of San Francisco the day of your guys' podcast launch party. And I saw the introduction for the podcast as like women who stutters, and being a fellow woman who stutters, I haven't really met that many women who stutters before, so that immediately kind of like intrigued me, and then I kind of also just realized that I haven't really been interacting with other people who stutter and haven't really been building community. So I just kind of wanted to go and check it out.
Yeah, and that's really what Proud Stutter is all about. It's about building a community, and also those who have friends that have someone that stutters. So Sarah, when did you first realize you had a stutter, and how was that for you growing up?
I think I first realized I had a stutter probably when I was old enough to realize kind of the reactions that I was getting from everyone around me every time that I spoke. So that was probably as early as second grade, when I, would have to get up in front of the class and say my name, and for me, S's were really hard, and so I would prolongate S's. So it would be really hard for me to say my name. And yeah, I guess I just kind of realized that I was different than everyone else around me when I would go to speech therapy and I would get pulled out of class for that. Yeah, that's kind of when I realized that I was someone who had disfluencies, and I don't know if at that time I knew it was a stutter. I just knew, I had trouble speaking.
And I think both of our stutters are very similar. Like, as I'm talking to you now, I see a lot of similarities, and usually when I am in a virtual space, usually around people who stutter, there's a lot of different forms of stuttering I hear, but it seems like we have very similar stutters. And I've been really wanting to talk about covert stuttering specifically, and I'm curious, when was the first time you met someone else who stuttered, and how was that for you?
Yeah, actually, the first time I met someone who stuttered was after I graduated college, and I was entering the workforce, so I decided to go to a NSA meeting. And I think my first meeting I met four or five other stutters. And I just remember, feeling just connected and not alone, and just kind of like at ease. Not feeling like I have to, exert the same energy that I do when I talk to other people who don't stutter. I don't have to hide myself. I don't have to use the same techniques with like switching words or blinking when I'm trying to get a word out, or other techniques that I've developed and used over the years. I also felt like the people that I met at the NSA group were more overt stutters, and I felt me kind of entering that space as a covert stutter was a different experience.
Yeah, I obviously, I feel like I have to remind myself and everyone else that I don't have a stutter. But I feel like what I've noticed with Maya being a covert stutterer, that there is this kind of sense of people wanting authenticity when you finally say, okay, I'm a person who stutters. And it feels like people are like, well, I need to hear it to believe it. So we have gotten comments from the podcast saying, Maya, you don't stutter enough. And Maya's like, I'm not stuttering for anyone. I don't know. What was your experience like when you were in this group and you clearly had a less pronounced stutter? Did you feel ostracized?
Absolutely. I did kind of feel ostracized, and I did kind of, feel like I had to kind of prove myself, like prove that I was a stutter and that I did belong there. But, you can't control when your stutter happens. And it was really hard for me to realize that, because I was very fluent. And yeah, I just kind of felt like I wanted my stutter to come out at that specific moment, even though I'm in no control over that whatsoever.
You would think that they would understand, like this person, yes, she's a covert stutterer, but she's here for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. And like she's here because, she wants to build that community and connect with other people who stutter, and not want to be seen as different within that community.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is internal too, because I have had the same exact experience being in, National Stuttering Association meetings. And when I first started joining those, I felt the same exact way. I felt like I wasn't stuttering enough, and I wasn't really representing people who stutter the right way. But then when I would open up about that and be like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, I realized it was all in my head, because everyone's response was like, it's okay. Like, everyone's stutter is different, and, you don't you can stutter as much and as less as you want. And we all know, because we're all stuttering, that a lot of times we can't control it. But then I think there's some people too in the stuttering community that think differently. And, there was a person who did send us a note that I wasn't stuttering enough. And I'm not even sure if that person stuttered themselves. They didn't disclose that, but it's just interesting to talk about this, because it is so internal. And I really struggled with my identity growing up, because sometimes I was able to pass as someone who isn't disabled. And then I would go through life feeling like, a very typical, normal person. And then all of a sudden be jerked back to being viewed by others as very disabled. So I've always felt that in between of not being disabled enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like the, phrases that you can get from some people really impact you and really make you, feel kind of like it's all in your head. Like, I know we've shared that we've gotten some of the same responses, when you disclose that you're stutter and people say, I never noticed, I have problems speaking too. Maybe it's just your anxiety. Maybe if you just slowed down some more, you would be fine. Just phrases like that I feel like can make you kind of feel like it's your, fault, and that you can do something about it in those times where you do stutter. I think that can kind of have a negative impact on your, own self-image.
Yeah, what I've learned from doing this podcast is it's very emotional. It seems like for a lot of stutterers and covert stutterers that, stuttering as a child was a very traumatic experience.
Yeah, I can definitely pinpoint some very traumatic experiences in my childhood and early adulthood, even in college too. And I wish, I could go back in time and just kind of let those people know that I stutter sometimes and that's okay, instead of them making it a big deal and them, asking if I forgot my name.
There's this one person who commented that's very relatable to what we're talking about now. When you've known someone for a long time and have hidden your stammer from them for potentially years and years, what's the best way to go about disclosing your stammer without hurting a friend's feelings for not being willing or able to share this part of yourself with them? So, us covert stutters, we're still dealing with opening up and sharing these things with our friends and worrying about their reaction and all that stuff. And I just remember feeling that way because I didn't want people to look at me different after I disclosed it. As I started opening up about it, I realized that the reason I am coming out about my stutter is so I can make it easier for everyone else to stutter.
Yeah, no, totally. Glennon Doyle, she had said something in her latest book, Untamed. Before you make anyone else happy, like, you have to make yourself happy. And if coming out as a stutter to your friends, to your family, to the community as a whole, like, helps you in your own, like, self journey, then, like, that's what's important. And not letting the fear of being judged kind of dictate that, because I know I let that fear get the best of me, like, my whole life, but now as I'm getting older, like, what matters is me being happy, and me exerting a lot of energy and time trying to hide my stutter is not helping me.
So I'm curious about, after you disclose to your friends, or, maybe not even friends, but the people around you that you have a stutter, do you ever get invalidated by the people around you? Do you ever feel like people are like, wait, you just said you had a stutter, but I don't hear it?
I've never had someone say, I don't think you do. But I have had people say, I've never noticed it before. I know a lot of people, or not I know a lot of people, but I know someone who stutters, like, way more, like, way more overtly, kind of like maybe insinuating that they don't think I have a stutter just because they aren't aware or they don't know what covert stuttering looks like. Which I guess in a way, yeah, that is kind of like they don't believe me because they know what overt stuttering looks like.
For me, at least, it's worse when no one believes me that I actually stutter. And especially because they don't see that I put so much effort, like, every waking moment to pass as fluent, or at least I used to be like that. And I still find myself being like that too, especially if I'm, like, doing a presentation or being more in the public. So in those situations, I try really hard to be fluent. But what's worse than stuttering is when people don't believe you when you tell them. And I think it's not that people are trying to hurt you when they respond. It's just people, when they think about stuttering, they have this very stereotypical thoughts about it. And so that's why whenever people respond like, oh, I didn't notice it, like, oh, it seems like you've overcome it, if they say any of those types of things, I always try to educate them.
Has there been a time where you have come out as a stutterer to someone and they've said, yeah, I've realized that about you, or yeah, I've noticed that? And how did that make you feel? Because I had that experience recently, and it was a very good feeling.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever gotten that response before because I only just started opening up about it, and really the only response that I've been getting is like I had no idea. So I'm curious about the example that you just shared and just more about that.
So what happened actually this past week, I was at work and talking to my coworker. I just kind of blurted it out and was like, "Do you know that I stutter?" And he was kind of like, "Yeah, I've realized that you have blocks sometimes, or like pause before you say things." And in that moment, I just kind of felt very validated because he was like, "Yeah, I realized that about you." And he didn't make a big deal about it at all. He was like, "Yes." And, it just felt really good to just kind of like hear that he saw that part of me, but that there wasn't like anything wrong with me.
Yeah, it's so important to have, especially coworkers like that just normalize it and kind of just shrug it off that's, it's just like stuttering's not a big deal. That just makes your life a lot easier. It makes my life a lot easier.
I think for a lot of people who don't stutter, it can be difficult to understand what it actually looks like for a person who has a stutter, and even more difficult, of course, for a person who has a covert stutter. Because what I've heard from a lot of my friends as reactions to the show is, I don't have a stutter, but I have stuttered at times, or sometimes I get blocked up saying when I'm feeling these kinds of ways. So I think, generally people have had these one-off experiences. And I say one-off just because of the emotional and mental toll that stuttering has for people who have a stutter. It's different for someone who doesn't, right? You have these moments and then you feel embarrassed afterwards, but it's not traumatic because we're not constantly trying to suppress it. So I think for someone who doesn't stutter and viewing and listening to someone who does have a stutter from the outside, it's not always easy to pinpoint, like, yes, that person has recurring stuttering, versus this person who is like, trying to articulate something and they repeat the first letter of their sentence a couple times.
I remember watching a documentary. There was this really good analogy that I really liked, and it was for people who don't stutter. Speaking is like walking on a 2x4. It's really easy to do. It's almost like habitual and routine. But for people who stutter, it's like walking on a 2x4 or a beam like 10 feet up in the air, and you're not worried about doing it effortlessly. You're worried about just making it through. And I think that analogy was just like, it really like enlightened, just like every time I speak in any kind of situation, I'm like always worried about what's going to come out. And people, whether they realize it or not, like don't really, know the amount of energy it takes to hide my stutter or use the techniques that I've used my whole life.
That's a great analogy.
Another one I really like, this one is from Dr. Joseph Sheehan, and his analogy is an iceberg. Only a small portion of the iceberg shows above the water. So the above the water portion represents the things that are visible to others, the physical movements, the sounds, the way someone behaves while stuttering. But what's invisible, the underwater part, that refers to everything you don't see when someone stutters, like the emotions I feel about stuttering, whether it's fear or frustration or embarrassment. And it's also the choices I make behind the scenes, like the choice to change words or to never raise my hand.
I really like that analogy. So much happens behind the scenes that people can't see. Not speaking up in certain situations or avoiding interviews or whatnot. I totally relate to that. I mean, like, I know when I was in college, like, looking for, internships and companies to work for, like, I remember keeping my stutter in mind, and I was like, is that company name going to be hard for me to say? Because it is already hard for me to say my name when I talk on the phone. So, like, let's try to avoid company names that are also hard to say, because then it's just a double whammy.
Yeah, and related to that, I recently spoke to the California Public Utilities Commission Disability Committee, and one of the things I told them that would be really beneficial for people who stutter that are interested in interviewing for the CPUC is to lengthen their interviews from 30 minutes to an hour, because having really tight windows of time to answer questions is really tough for people who stutter. I do have one more question for you, Sarah, and this kind of is something that I've been thinking about myself, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are about it. Do you consider stuttering a disability? Because I know there's been a lot of debate, at least I've seen, of whether or not stuttering is a disability, and do you identify with someone as a disability?
I do think it is a disability. Looking back on my childhood and the situations that I was in where my stutter held me back, I kind of really wish that I spoke up and told my teachers or told my professors or told anyone kind of in like a position of power, that I stutter, because maybe that would have, given me the extra time that I needed during presentations, or given me the, just extra support that I needed to help me, feel more comfortable in those speaking situations. And I think, in order to get that support, I think it does kind of, need to be seen as a disability.
Yeah, Sarah, I totally agree with you on that. And that's why now I fully embrace my disability identity. No matter what anyone thinks, it's all about how I feel. And the more I own my identity, the more I can help others, those who stutter, and also those who have other disabilities as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Maya. And I think you are already doing that. And I feel like I'm having conversations with family and friends that I probably should have had a long time ago. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for doing this work and for helping to normalize stuttering.
And that's it for this episode. I'm Maya.
And I'm Cynthia.
And you've been listening to Proud Stutter. This episode of Proud Stutter was produced by me, Maya Chupkov.
And edited by me, Cynthia Chen. Our music was composed by Augusto Denise, and our artwork by Mara Ezekiel and Noah Chupkov.
If you have an idea or want to be part of future episodes, find us on Twitter @ProudStutter. You can also find us at www.proudstutter.com.
Drop us a note or share a voice memo. What's your stuttering story? What topics would you like us to cover? And what are you curious about?
And if you like the show, you can leave us a review wherever you are listening to this podcast.
More importantly, tell your friends to listen too.
Until we meet again, thanks for listening. Be proud and be you.